Friends, the situation in the Middle East is shifting by the hour. Iran is raising the stakes, and Israel is absorbing blows it did not fully anticipate. Tehran is operating with precision, methodically targeting energy systems, maritime corridors, and military installations. Every move made by the coalition is now under pressure. Today, we're going to break down exactly how Iran is slowly chipping away at its adversaries' defenses and what all of this could ultimately lead to. As always, I'm your host. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear is rarely spoken about this openly. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let's get into it. Day 12 of the war in the Middle East is revealing something deeply unsettling. This conflict is not just continuing, it is accelerating. What began as what many hoped would be a contained military operation has steadily transformed into a full-scale confrontation, pulling in more countries and more regions by the day. The conflict was initiated on February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes against Iran, targeting leadership, nuclear infrastructure, and ballistic missile capabilities. Encyclopedia Britannica coalition air power and missiles have continued hammering targets across the country. Strikes have been reported in multiple major cities: Tehran, Isfahan, Kermanshah, and Shiraz. The attacks focus on what are considered the backbone of Iran's military architecture: weapons storage facilities, air defense networks, and defense manufacturing sites. But the situation has not unfolded the way many Western analysts expected. Iran is hitting back, and hitting back harder. Iran's armed forces have struck key targets in Israel, including a military intelligence headquarters and a naval base in Haifa, while also targeting U.S. military installations in Kuwait and Bahrain. Al Jazeera. These are not symbolic gestures, they are calculated moves against the operational capacity of the coalition. Simultaneously, pressure is growing on maritime routes. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps has fired on and stopped multiple vessels in the Strait of Hormuz after they ignored warnings to halt. Al Jazeera. The geography of this conflict is expanding fast. Not long ago, the fighting was concentrated in limited zones. Now, the conversation includes Iraq, Syria, Gulf states, Lebanon, and of course, Israel. Against this backdrop, more and more experts are describing what's unfolding as a prolonged war of attrition. And that brings us to a critical point increasingly echoed in analytical circles. Tehran does not appear to be acting impulsively. Its strategy looks calculated for sustained pressure, not one dramatic strike, but a rolling sequence of moves designed to gradually shift the balance of power. That is why observers are increasingly concluding that Iran is raising the stakes and systematically dismantling its opponent's defenses piece by piece. The next phase of escalation is playing out not just in the air and on land, but at sea. And it is here that Iran is sending one of the most dangerous signals of the entire conflict. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has made its position unmistakably clear. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz is no longer guaranteed safe passage. This threat immediately sent alarm bells through global markets. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most strategically vital waterways on the planet. Roughly one-fifth of the world's entire oil supply passes through this narrow channel daily. Tanker convoys carry crude from Gulf states to Europe, Asia, and beyond. Even minor disruptions to this route trigger serious economic ripple effects. Key oil prices have already spiked above $100 a barrel as Iranian attacks on shipping have worsened supply concerns. Encyclopedia Britannica traders and energy analysts are rapidly recalibrating their risk models because any serious incident in the strait could push fuel costs higher, strain supply chains, and reignite inflationary pressures in economies still recovering from previous shocks. The Fertilizer Institute noted that nearly half of global urea and sulfur exports, along with roughly 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas, transit through the Strait of Hormuz, meaning the conflict's reach extends far beyond the battlefield and into global food security. Wikipedia. The echoes of the 1980s tanker war are not lost on military historians. Back then, a supertanker struck a naval mine in the Persian Gulf and exposed just how exposed maritime routes could be, even with a superpower's fleet in the region. Today, analysts are asking whether history is about to repeat itself on an even larger scale. If this conflict escalates to a full blown naval confrontation, the consequences would not be limited to individual ships. The entire architecture of the global energy supply would come under strain. Tehran understands this and appears to be using it deliberately as a lever of economic warfare, applying pressure at one of the most sensitive points in the international system. Then came the reports that genuinely shocked Western defense analysts. This was no longer about individual base strikes or supply depot attacks. According to multiple battlefield accounts, Iran has begun deliberately targeting components of the American Early Warning Detection Network. Reports indicate that advanced radar systems used to track aerial and missile threats have been hit. Systems such as the AN-FPS 132 and AN-TPS 59 are among those referenced. Critical nodes in the defensive architecture of the U.S. and its partners, responsible for the early identification of incoming missiles, aircraft, and airborne threats. These systems are the eyes of modern air defense. They allow military commanders to detect danger early enough to mount a response. Destroying them is not simply about damaging equipment, it is about creating blind spots in the entire surveillance network. And here's the detail that defense insiders find most alarming. Replacing these systems is not a matter of weeks or even months. Production and deployment of a new AN-FPS 132 class radar complex can take anywhere from 5 to 8 years. Each unit carries a price tag that can exceed $1 billion. These are not off-the-shelf items. Losing them represents a long-term strategic hole that cannot be quickly patched. This is precisely why analysts are now discussing what they describe as a deliberate Iranian targeting doctrine. Not random strikes, but a systematic dismantling of the most sensitive nodes in the opponent's defense grid. Not a knockout punch, but a slow, methodical pressure campaign. And if that doctrine is truly being executed, it explains why the word systematic keeps appearing in intelligence briefings. Meanwhile, the drone war is opening its own disturbing front. Reports have confirmed the shootdown of at least one American MQ-9 Reaper, one of the most capable and widely deployed reconnaissance strike platforms in the U.S. arsenal. The MQ-9 is no ordinary drone. It can loiter for dozens of hours, conduct live surveillance, track enemy movement across wide areas, and deliver precision strikes on ground targets via satellite link. It serves as the battlefield's eye in the sky, and its price, roughly $30 million per unit, often significantly more when factoring in onboard systems and communications gear, makes every loss a headline event. Iranian military representatives have claimed their air defense systems tracked and eliminated the aircraft, adding that anti-drone capabilities have been significantly upgraded in recent years. If confirmed, this marks a meaningful shift in how the conflict is playing out. Drones provide real-time intelligence that shapes every decision on the battlefield. When operating them becomes genuinely dangerous, commanders lose visibility. They are forced to operate with incomplete information, and in a war of attrition, that is a serious disadvantage. While the military picture darkens, Washington is simultaneously facing a crisis of a different kind, a political one, and it is emerging from a corner where the United States has historically counted on ironclad support. Reports are multiplying about growing unease among America's Gulf allies. The reason is straightforward. Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain have all reported intercepting Iranian missiles and drones, with Saudi Arabia confirming its military destroyed a drone east of the Al-Kharj governorate. Al Jazeera. These countries find themselves in an extraordinarily uncomfortable position. On one hand, they are bound to Washington through defense agreements, arms contracts, and joint security frameworks. On the other, their own territories have become collateral battlegrounds in a war between the U.S. and Iran. The question being whispered in regional political circles, and increasingly asked out loud, is simple. Why should Gulf states absorb Iranian retaliation for a conflict they did not start? Iraq's prime minister directly told U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio that his country must not be used as a launchpad for attacks Al Jazeera after strikes hit several locations on Iraqi soil. The cracks in coalition solidarity are real. Even the suggestion of contract renegotiations or revised security arrangements sends tremors through Western policy circles because the entire scaffolding of American strategy in the Middle East rests on these relationships. One regional analyst framed it bluntly: "You two are fighting, and we're the ones getting hit." If that sentiment takes root among key U.S. partners, the political costs of this conflict could ultimately rival the military ones. Back at the Pentagon, a telling signal has emerged. Training exercises for the 82nd Airborne Division, one of America's most rapidly deployable combat forces, have been abruptly suspended. Each brigade combat team in this division fields roughly 5,000 troops and maintains the ability to deploy virtually anywhere on the planet within 24 hours. Their primary mission set includes rapid seizure of airfields, control of critical infrastructure, and the evacuation of diplomatic personnel under fire. The combination of speed, versatility, and combat experience makes them the U.S. military's go-to instrument for emergency operations. Military observers are not treating the suspension of exercises as routine. The working assumption is that this reflects preparation for a potential ground operation, one that could go well beyond reinforcing existing bases. Scenarios being discussed include the seizure of key Iranian infrastructure and the establishment of forward operational positions for coalition forces. If Iran continues its systematic erosion of U.S. and allied defensive capabilities, and if Washington decides a ground response is unavoidable, the region may be standing on the edge of a dramatically larger escalation. So, where does this leave us? The picture, viewed in full, is deeply tense on every axis simultaneously. Tehran says nearly 10,000 civilian sites have been struck, and more than 1,300 civilians killed since the war began, while Iran's counterstrikes have hit U.S. bases, Israeli military targets, and Gulf state infrastructure alike. Al Jazeera coalition airpower continues to pound Iran, targeting military installations, command structures, and industrial facilities across multiple cities, but full dominance of Iranian airspace remains out of reach. Iran, for its part, is operating on multiple fronts at once. It is striking at energy infrastructure to squeeze the economies of U.S. partners. It is applying lethal pressure on maritime corridors at the Strait of Hormuz, sending shockwaves through global commodity markets. It is targeting early warning and air defense systems to degrade the coalition's situational awareness over the long term, and it is exploiting the political fractures between Washington and its nervous regional allies. Unlike the ceasefire reached after the 12-day war of 2025, the decision to pursue decapitation strikes this time has locked both the U.S. and Israel into a war of attrition with no clear diplomatic exit in sight. Al Jazeera. Every new exchange reduces coalition effectiveness and raises the strategic value of each Iranian action. Predicting outcomes in this environment has become nearly impossible, and any miscalculation risks consequences that extend far beyond the region. The central question remains unanswered. If what we are witnessing now is only the opening chapter, what comes next? And when the dust settles, what will the Middle East and the global order look like on the other side? The world is watching as a new and dangerous phase of confrontation takes shape. Stay close to the news, friends. The situation is evolving every single minute. There may come a day very soon when nothing looks the same as it did before. As always, I've been your host. The world isn't sleeping, and neither am I. See you in the next one.